Welcome to the Leaders and Loggers podcast. On this week's podcast, we are joined by Special Guest Eric Maddox, a former U.S. Army Special Forces interrogator who conducted over 300 interrogations and collected intelligence that led to the direct capture of Saddam Hussein. He now consults with the corporate world on the lessons of empathy-based listening. I share a glass of Yuzu Lager from the Kiuchi Brewery in Ibaraki-ken, Japan. My name is Kevin Dawson, and I hope you'll join us for a glass and conversation today. Well, welcome to Leaders and Loggers. And on this week's podcast, I am joined by special guest Eric Maddox. Eric Maddox is an American public speaker, author, and former special operations soldier. And he was a member of Delta Force Special Operations Team in Tikrit, and that was part of the Joint Special Operations Command responsible for tracking down the most wanted men in Iraq. During his 6-month tour with his Delta Force team, Eric conducted over 300 interrogations and collected intelligence, which directly led to the capture of Saddam Hussein. Eric, I'm so excited to have you on. Welcome to the Leaders and Loggers podcast.
Thank you, Kevin.
You know, we got a chance to visit a little bit last week and kind of get to know one another. And first off, I just want to say thank you to my friend Clay, who introduced the two of us. Clay has been a great friend and a big supporter of the show. And so thank you, Clay, for introducing Eric and I. And so I'm very excited. This is our second video podcast, episode 101, which we're going to get a little bit of a 101 on empathy-based learning, because I know that is empathy-based listening. We're going to learn from you on what that means here in just a little bit. But today I am drinking all the way from Japan, from I'm going to butcher this because I don't speak a lick of Japanese, but the Kiuchi Brewery, their Yuzu Lager, which is a Hitachino Nest beer, is one of the more expensive cans of beer. I don't know how much you typically spend on a can of beer, but this is about a $6 can. So cheers. Very citrusy. Not bad. Well, Eric, I'd love for our listeners just to learn a little bit about who you are and your story, and then we'll just kind of go see a little bit about what you do now as you know, helping business leaders learn how to win trust through empathy-based listening.
Sure, Kevin. I was a U.S. Army soldier. I was a trained interrogator in 2003. The Joint Special Operations Command, they were looking for everybody on the deck of cards, Saddam Hussein, and they had Delta Force teams throughout the country tracking him down. There was a Delta Force team in his hometown of Tikrit, Iraq, that wanted to have an interrogator with them. So I was in the United States at the time as an interrogator. I was trained in Chinese Mandarin. I was working as an intelligence collection officer against the Chinese. And when they started the war, they said, "Oh, don't worry, you'll never get sent to Iraq." And I get these unexpected orders to join this Delta Force team. I was attached to them. And as I began the interrogations, trying to get these prisoners to cooperate, I realized that everything that I'd been taught by the old Army techniques, they weren't going to work in this type of war. Insurgent fighters, small towns, no uniform, no battlefield, no chain of command. I didn't know how to get prisoners to open up. And I realized that cooperation is based on trust. And I know they're the enemy and we're talking, but trust doesn't really have anything to do with what side you're on. It's your ability to seek to understand at least the perspective. You don't have to agree with it, but to understand the perspective of somebody else allows them that trust enough to do a partnership. And when I started to realize that these prisoners will trust me if I'll at least seek to understand their perspective, what they need, Delta Force commander I was with said, Eric, do whatever you need to do. We'll even help them. We can release some of these guys, get their cooperation to get the intel. I ended up doing 300 interrogations. These 300 prisoners laid out the insurgency network in the Sunni Triangle. And at the top was one man we believed knew the exact location of Saddam Hussein. It was one of his former bodyguards. On my last day, on my tour in Iraq, we finally found that bodyguard. I used this technique, and in less than 2 hours, the bodyguard said, Eric, I know where he is, and I'll take you. That night, December 13th, 2003, he took that small Delta Force team I was with to the exact location of the spider hole, took us straight to Saddam willingly, and kind of aggressively said, you guys aren't looking in the right spot. Get me out of this truck. Here, let me show you. Delta Force team let him out of the truck, and he took him to the exact spider hole. As a result of the capture of Saddam, the Department of Defense, they loved the way we tracked Saddam. They liked the way I did the interrogations. Secretary of Defense at the time, Donald Rumsfeld, decided he's going to create his own 30-person team of interrogators. And I was hired as the first one. My first assignment was to teach this process. I ended up doing a total of 8 deployments, 2,700 interrogations of prisoners from 25 different countries. And the rest of my career up until 2014 was focusing on understanding the psychology of building the required level of trust to where the enemy on the battlefield in minutes goes, I'm with you. So I retired in 2014 as a civilian interrogator with the Defense Intelligence Agency and realized businesses need this exact same communication process. So I'm a keynote speaker. I do training on empathy-based listening.
That's amazing. As I sit here thinking about, we're sitting here getting ready to, we're recording this the weekend of the 20th anniversary of 9/11. And obviously this episode has come out since then. And to think back 20 years to that date, almost 20 years to the date of capturing Saddam. I remember all of those very vividly, where I was when I heard about, the first plane hitting. I remember, where I was when, Saddam was announced, ladies and gentlemen, we got him. Obviously being from President Bush's hometown, there was a lot to do with that, and all of those things. And just, there's a lot that to be learned over the last 20 years from, the war on terror and taking lessons from the battlefield to the boardroom. And I think what you have taught over the last several decades on empathy-based learning is something that leaders in the corporate world really need more than ever. It seems like we need empathy-based listening, because it seems like we live in a society that very easily takes a side, and it's my way or the highway, and there's no other direction. There's nobody who's willing to take the time to listen. And so, as you've kind of seen this over your career, how do we as leaders, whether it's in the boardroom or the battlefield, really win the trust of those people that may see things differently than us?
So great question, especially for leaders. So if you think about, for a leader to get where they are, they're probably intelligent. They're probably inspirational, charismatic. But when you get to a certain level and you're managing so many people, that key transition for a leader where they say, I lead from the front, I've blazed a path. They've got to step back and say, your only role now is to empower your people. You've led, but this is so big now. We've got to take your abilities and we have to empower everyone. That's a tough transition for leaders. And so the way I like to explain it, having done a gazillion interrogations, I focus on the psychology, and people, they want two things. right? People want two things. They want to have an impact. They want to matter. They want a life that matters. And they want freedom, right? They want resources to be able to do what they want to do. I want my own time. I want to, this country was founded on the fight for freedom. So when people want an impact, they want to draw people towards them. And I always say, we're all born to lead in our own movies. Now, if we're all to lead in our own movies, we're all alone on our own stage. So we want people to come off their stage and onto ours. That's how we make an impact. The problem is nobody wants to leave their stage. That's where their freedom is. So as a leader, we have to realize, I got here. I've got a great movie. This is a successful movie. But we don't want to drag people onto our stage because we take away their freedom. What we want to do is empower them by walking off, taking our abilities onto their stage. And that's the key to empathy-based listening. Leadership is empowering others.
Absolutely. I agree with you on those two things about making an impact and wanting freedom. I think especially the generation that I grew up with as an older millennial and those behind me, while there's a lot of negatives that can be said about millennials and Gen Z and stereotypes, ultimately what I have learned is that millennials, Gen Z, and it even extends on to older generations, everybody wants to have a lasting impact, a legacy of some sort that people will remember them by. There is a lot more altruism in people than they're willing to admit. But some of that comes with, you have to kind of learn to navigate your freedom, because freedom is one of those things that, while it's great, there's a lot of responsibility that comes with it. Especially as a leader, you sometimes have to be willing to give up some of your freedom for the greater good.
So we could say, yeah, we may be giving up our freedom as a leader, right? I say we give up control to our subordinates, but we gain the influence, because nobody wants to go on someone else's stage, right? They always like to make it about them. So when we do take our value to someone else's stage, they cherish us. We separate from the competition. And psychologically, they go, oh my goodness, nobody ever comes on my stage. You actually did. I don't want you to go anywhere. Who has the influence there? The person who gave up control.
Absolutely. As I sit here thinking about, all the different things that you've done, and as you kind of explain what that looks like as a empathy-based listener, what stories in your mind stick out as where it really felt like, okay, I'm getting somewhere with someone, or even if, as you've taught people, where they've kind of had that light bulb moment go off in their heads, like, oh, this is what this looks like.
Oh, it's got to be one of those early interrogations, right? So I was in Iraq. It was 2003. I'm with this Delta Force team. I appreciate you said I was part of a Delta Force team. I was an interrogator on a Delta Force team. Their Delta Force, I was in their interrogator. Just so we're clear, I was scared to death. Not of them beating me or anything. I just didn't want to let them down. And as I do these interrogations, they don't work. The Army, everything the Army taught me didn't work. And I'm trying to figure out, how do I get these prisoners to break? And I started to realize, okay, all my mental distractions, they're in my way. I'm not listening. I was kind of putting those behind. And I realized, Kevin, when I can really focus, I could tell when prisoners lied to me, right? And I thought, oh, I can catch them in lies. I can use this. I can talk to a prisoner 2 or 3 hours, tell you 3 or 4 places exactly where they lie to me. This prisoner, new prisoner, sits down. He immediately goes, Eric, you got to let me out of here. He said, I'm innocent. I said, I'm going to make a deal with you. I said, you talk to me. If you don't tell me a single lie, not one, I said, I'm going to let you walk out that door. You can go home right now. I said, but if you lie to me just once, you spend the rest of your life in prison. I sat and I talked to this prisoner. Kevin, I found a couple areas I knew he's being deceptive. I kind of stopped him after a couple hours and I said, how many brothers do you have? He said, I told you I have 3. I said, you have 4. My prisoner's jaw just drops, right? He's like, and I said, what was our deal? I said, what was the deal? We just cut, and the prisoner's kind of shaking. He looks at me and he said, can we cut a new deal? I said, yeah, here's our new deal. You're going to tell me every single thing you know. Kevin, that prisoner looks at me and he says, Eric, I can't. He said, you don't get me and you don't want to get me. And I realized he's right. I may have been focusing on what he was saying, but I wasn't listening for him. I was listening for me, trying to capture him in the lies for my benefit and my powers. At that moment, I said, is that possible? Can we, as humans, even listen to someone exclusive of our goals and agendas and objectives? And when that transformation took place, and I said, just see if it can be done, the power in that gets these prisoners to open up. And that's where the whole thing started, was that interrogation.
I love how you said, I listened for him. That's such a huge, I mean, just sitting here thinking about it, like I get caught up when I'm talking to someone and I want something from them that I forget I need to listen for them, not for me. And I think that's, coming from a sales background, we're taught all these different sales and negotiation tactics. And here's all the things that, you're supposed to say in order to get someone to say yes to buying from you. And I'm thinking, if I want them to buy from me, I need to take away what I want and actually listen to what they need.
Kevin, what you just described, your sales tactics, that's what interrogation was. That's what the old technique said, is try to build a little rapport, identify their needs, their problem, means they got a problem on their movie, and convince them over here on your movie, you've got all the solutions for them. You're going to take care of them. Look at this. You have all the evidence that says my movie's better. Come on over here. Here's the problem. We can get people on our stage in times of need. But once they get a little bit of that solved, once they get that relief, all they want to do is go back to their stage. That's the difference.
I'm sitting here thinking all the things that I have tried in the past, as either as a leader or a salesperson, or, as a father, or, things like that, just to say, like, sometimes we get too far ahead of ourselves and we have to take a step back and actually have an out-of-body experience to sit in somebody else's shoes.
Yeah.
And be able to really get them to feel inspired, empowered to say, hey, we want to go with you, or we want to do things because of you, because you actually understand us. You understand me. And, I see, the national conversations, especially around politics, which is my least favorite thing in the world to deal with, because it's just gotten so ugly. But I honestly believe at the end of the day, there's more that makes us alike than different. We just are trying to come at things from just different perspectives and just trying to solve a lot of the same things. We just have very different ideological perspectives.
So I hate the conversation about politics, but for everyone listening, I want to give you a thought. Okay. So let's say you got the left and you got the right. They're just US citizens. They're just Americans. I mean, it's getting pretty hostile, right?
Yeah.
It's just about gaining influence, making a difference, making an impact in your life. So imagine this. Say you have the people on the left. Well, they all agree with each other anyway. So when one of them's going off on their rant, they want to make an impact. They're not making an impact on their world. These people already agree with them, right? They're just getting approval, but they're not really making an impact. Now we have the people on the right, same situation. But let's say I'm right, and I'm pretty conservative. For me to at least go and listen, not to change the way I think, but to seek to understand their perspective, the people on the left are dying to talk to me because I'm seeking to understand. They're actually feeling more impacted, which gives me more influence. to be on the opposite side. I'm not going to change my opinion. Maybe it informs me. Maybe it can shift. They don't even need you to change. They just need you to understand. So I want you to think, we can argue, or we can just sit around the people who agree with us and just feel good about ourselves. But there's so much more influence because the group that you're opposite of, they're dying for you to listen to them. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. It's, it's so interesting to see people, want to sit in these echo chambers, whether it's politics or it's, Sooners versus Longhorns.
There you go.
If we flip it that way, and we want to be surrounded by people, but it doesn't, when it seems like when we're surrounded by the same people who say the same things as us, we don't have any influence. Where's
what are you doing?
Yeah, where's the influence to give? So, as a leader, to be able to take the time to sit and understand someone from the other and their perspective, you may not convert them to your way of thinking. They may not convert you to their way of thinking, but just to sit there and say, hey, let's just understand one another. Maybe we can find some common ground. I had a chance not too long ago. I was actually at the George W. Bush Library there in Dallas, and his new painting exhibit, out of many one, there was a great stories relating to the whole immigration process, and they had these exhibits that talked about finding common ground, which all it is empathy-based listening. That's all it was. It was empathy-based listening. How do we get to a common ground? Because there are issues in the world that we want to solve. We just don't know how to solve because you've got party A and party B thinking, oh, this is the right way to do it. And they might both be right. But nobody will take the time to listen to say, how do we make this work? And where's the common ground?
I always like to try to look into the details of certain settings and situations. And if you look at the setting in Afghanistan, right? We've been at war for 20 years. I did 3 deployments to Afghanistan. I conducted 1,200 interrogations of Taliban members. They're not my favorite group of people, right? I'm not a big fan. It was us against them for 20 years. Let's not forget, when we were getting all those people out, Taliban controlled the country. They pretty much controlled Kabul, and they pretty much controlled everything around the airport. The level of coordination that was required from the United States military in the Taliban to get all those people out was amazing. Coordination. You remember, some of our leaders said, we don't trust them, we don't like them, but we are working together to get everyone out. So you talk about common ground. What's the common ground? We want to leave. They want us to leave. So it's like, wait a second. You can take people who've tried to kill each other for 20 years and that quickly go, we got to work together to get everybody out of here.
Absolutely. It's such an interesting dynamic to watch when you have a common ground to start with and a common objective, and can quickly and easily work together to accomplish something big. And whether it's, evacuating hundreds of thousands of people out of a country, or just trying to get a new, policy enacted within a company. It's the same deal. You can be, someone who is in the finance department who needs to work with someone in the HR department, 2 departments that seem to butt heads because one needs to spend money, one doesn't want to spend money. And yet, in order to take care of people, we've got to do that. And so where do we work together to find that common ground of, oh, if we do this, then maybe we'll be more profitable because we're taking care of our people.
Can I give you an example that's really stood out to me?
Sure.
So we talk about George W. Bush Sr., right? He was president, conservative, Republican. with Bill
George
Clinton.
Clinton.
Right. It's not beer, I promise.
Yeah.
Here we go. Bill Clinton. Right. And they're enemies. They didn't fight a war, but didn't like each other. Do you remember when they came together and they were seen together and they were working together? I know for me, it felt so patriotic. It was like, look at those two putting their egos down, working together. I know it meant a lot to both of them. And for me, I'm like, that's an example of leadership.
I absolutely, yeah, I love their relationship.
I
love George W. Bush and Michelle Obama's relationship. They just, like, I want a sitcom to be created out of just the two of them, because I think it would be hilarious, because they just seem to get along so well. And, yes, they have difference of opinions on how to, go about doing certain things, but that's what makes, who we are as a people great.
Right.
Is we can have differences of opinions and yet still get along with one another and be cordial and work together and and accomplish great things, whether it's how do we deal with a hunger issue around the world, or how do we deal with education issues, or how do we can solve these big issues because whether it's political differences or something else, we want to exercise that influence and say we did something.
I mean, I can't imagine how much influence and respect and just influence both those former presidents gained from the other side by those actions. And makes your life, it's an impactful life. It's a life that matters.
Absolutely. And those relationships, have far extended, to so many different people and so many different things. A friend of mine who was on the podcast, who's now the mayor of Midland, actually went through the Presidential Leadership Scholars Program, which was created through a partnership between George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton and George W. Bush and the LBJ libraries, and say, hey, let's actually learn from each other and solve these big issues. And yet it doesn't matter what your ideological points of view are, whether on these things, we can all learn from one another, and let's listen to one another, because leaders at the end of the day have to be really good listeners.
Well, I think it's everything. So I think the challenge is we have to go to kind of root cause of why we are bad listeners. And I always tell people, if we're going to address a problem, we have to admit that there is a problem, right? Step one.
Yep.
Got a problem. And that really is our biggest challenge, is because we've made it this far in life not being great listeners. So what does it matter? But if we can see the impact, the power, the difference it makes, the influence when you are, it will be a no-brainer. If we can just step back and see those benefits.
So what would you say to someone who's listening, to say, try this to get to that point? Because I think we have some issues there. And
hold on, you froze up on me. Yeah, start over. I got you now.
Yeah, I saw it for a second. I was like, oh no. I think for people who are listening, so the listeners this week, who struggle with stopping and listening, because whether they have ADD and they get distracted easily by the next shiny thing, or they just really have a hard time listening because they're in their own head most of the time, or they're trying to present their agenda. What advice would you give to them to say, hey, to get to be that better listener, to be that better leader, here's what you should do or start with?
So I've done way more research on this than probably anybody cares to hear. But here's the thing. On average, people only listen to 25% of what they hear, right? 25%. We have to understand why. It's the way our brains work. Our brains, we can actually hear 5 times faster than the average person can talk. We're naturally selfish and self-centered because we're lead in our own movies. All lead characters are lead roles. So when somebody's talking to us, it sounds like they're talking really, really slow. We get bored out of our minds. We feel that 80% capacity with anything else we want. Problem is this: when it comes to listening, the human brain cannot multitask. We can't hear everything somebody says, still take that 80% capacity and fill it with our distractions. So they cover, they fill, they cloud things that we are actually hearing. It lowers our listening. But the question is why? Now, I've broken listening distractions down into 6 categories, 1 through 6. Category 1 being the least significant, category 6 being the most. The most significant category, the biggest distraction we all have in listening, it's thinking about what we're going to say next during the conversation. The 5th category is thinking about our goals and agenda, our objectives in a conversation. So we want to talk about, if we just take the 2 biggest categories, right? Think about our goals, agendas, objectives. That means we're building our movie that works for us. The problem, then you go to category 6, thinking about what we're going to say next. When you think about what we're thinking about saying next, for most people who are not good listeners, they're thinking as the lead role. They want to be the problem solver. They want to be wise. They want to be creative. They want to look good. Some people just want to be funny, right? We all know the comedians. They're like, oh man, I wish I was a comedian. They're so funny. Here's the problem. Most comedians, they're not good listeners at all. They're not listening to anything the person's actually trying to say. They're just thinking of their next joke. So when you say, I'm in my head, yeah, you're in your head because you're thinking about what you want to get accomplished and how you want to appear. So if we're going to actually be good listeners, it's not like stop and listen. Oh no, this is inside our brains. We have to stop and go, quit trying to be lead role. You want to be the world's greatest supporting actor. But what about my goals and agenda? You should have one goal, one agenda. Get on their stage. The only place where trust exists is on their stage. Eric, that's not what I want to do. Trust on someone else's stage is where the highest level of influence is. And remember, we all want to make an impact. So if we're going to unpack this, I'm up in my head, we've got to understand why we do it. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. As I sit here listening, a couple of things came to my mind and I had to file them away so I could continue to listen. First one, this was kind of interesting to me. So I had an opportunity to go through professional speaking class. And one of the things that they talk about as a speaker, so you don't get ahead of yourself, because when you start thinking about that next sentence or phrase, because we speak so fast and our brain is moving faster sometimes than we're speaking, is when we'll start to use filler words, things like that. And they said, pause, give yourself a moment to catch up. And it's the same in listening. Shut up in your head. Give yourself a pause. And as a leader, and going back to this speaking engagement training, they talked about, if you want to be impactful to your audience, it's not about what you're saying, it's about what they want to learn. So, in the same sense of what you're talking about, of giving, you have to kind of hold your thoughts back and then also get out that, what's your goal and agenda. My goal and agenda, anytime I go up and speak, is not to be the greatest speaker in the room. I'm hoping that the people in the audience, their goal and agenda is to learn something from me. What is it that they need? What is it they want? So from a speaker's perspective, when I walk into a room, I have to put myself in the shoe of the audience and say, if I'm sitting in here, what is it that I want to learn, or what do I need today, and why am I coming to listen to this person? So I have to be the supporting actor, even though I'm on the stage.
100%. I couldn't agree more. So I'm a keynote speaker. This year, I'll do approximately 140 events. So for any aspiring keynote speakers, I'll tell you there's 3 things you got to have, right? You don't have to have them all, and depending on the level you have them, great. Number 1, it helps if you've done something cool. I don't care what it is. Just find something you've done that's noteworthy. You better be a good storyteller, right? But number 3, you better give them value. That's all that matters. The biggest compliment I can give, that I can receive when I give my keynote, Eric, that story tracking down Saddam was awesome, but I wish we would have spent more time on empathy-based listening. I mean, I tracked down the most wanted guy in the world working on a Delta Force team in the middle of a war zone. That's awesome. Guess what? They don't care because it's not their movie. They want you to give something for their movie. That's all that matters.
Absolutely. And I think for whether you're a speaker or you're a leader and you're trying to bring up those behind you, you've got to let the people behind you shine in their movies, because that's what they're looking for. And the best thing we can do is to give them their moment in the spotlight, which is funny for me.
That's leadership.
It's leadership, which for me, it's really funny because, like, you know, I'll speak at events and stuff too, but I love working behind the scenes on the production side way more than I like being in the spotlight, because I love to elevate the people in the room and say, look, let's me put you there versus getting up on stage.
You know, my favorite part of speaking is the Q&A, because in the Q&A, we get to shine on somebody else, right?
Right.
One of the fun fact, over 85% of the time somebody asks a question, they don't care what your answer is. They want to direct the conversations towards that topic. So when somebody asks you a question, we shouldn't say, okay, here's the answer. Here, look, I'm lead. Here's my answer. But let me ask you this. Great question. And deeper on that, can I ask you? Right? Because they want their stage. Let's give it to them. And now we've empowered the crowd, and now we get their thoughts. Now their value, you get credit for it. You're the one who they booked. But we've empowered the crowd to contribute to the overall value of an event.
Absolutely. It's so rewarding when you know, you get to create the value in the room for people, and people to feel valued. And as leaders, that's, you know, should be our goal, is to make people feel valued.
One of the two things they want: an impactful life.
Absolutely. Well, Eric, it is time for last call. And so for our listeners this week, what is something that they can be doing to be a better leader?
We need to be able to self-critique, receive mentorship. We always say, where does the leader go when they have questions? We need to be able to go to, you need to have at least 3 people that you can go to and go, am I a good leader? And don't just say, well, they said no, let me go ask somebody else. When they say no, say why. Most of the time, what you're going to hear is, if they're really willing to be honest, to say, sometimes you're great, other times you're not. Aha. Then say, well, when am I a good leader? When am I not? But it comes down to this. We have to understand, we may have gotten to where we are as leaders by making our movie fantastic. A true leader is going to walk off his stage, her stage, and empower others on theirs. That's it. Let's not make this complicated. Get off your stage and go empower on somebody else's.
Love it. Love it. So, Eric, how can our listeners connect with you, learn about you? I know you've got this awesome book out there, Mission Blacklist #1, which tells more of the story that we really didn't talk about, because I think learning about all the things that we talked about today was much greater value for our listeners. And if they want to go find more about all the other things that you've done, how can they do so?
Sure. So my book's Mission Blacklist #1, and it's a war story, right? It's kind of from my perspective of, I've never been to war, I've never done interrogations, to here's Saddam Hussein. And so it's a great, fun war story, you can reach out to me. It's info@ericmaddox.com. We can connect. I connect on LinkedIn twice a week. I put 2 to 3 minute videos out on some snippet of empathy-based listening. I throw that value out there, right? Let's get better at this as leaders. And just this fall, late in the fall, we're going to be launching an empathy-based listening training program. I call it the Maddox Principle, right? All about me on my stage, but it's a 6-week training to become an empathy-based listener. And, I've realized trying to be a trainer, people got to get better. They got to practice, right? We always do battle drills and get better in the garrison so we succeed on the battlefield. So this training's a lot of practice, repetition to get out of the old lead character training, listening to world's greatest supporting actor. So I'm out there. If you want to reach out to me, I'd love to hear from you.
Well, fantastic. Well, Eric, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been so great. I have learned quite a bit, and just a chance to get to visit with you also has been phenomenal. And I just really appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks, Kevin. Hope you like the Japanese beer.
It is really good. I'm actually going to leave a review for this for anyone who wants to track down this beer on our Untapped app page. And you can follow us there as well as our other social media platforms. And join us next week for another glass and conversation. Thank you for joining us today on Leaders and Loggers.
Thanks, Kevin.